The slap echoed through the crowded street like a gunshot. Amara Johnson's head snapped sideways, her cheek burning from the force. 4 white police officers surrounded her, their laughter cutting through the afternoon air. Bystanders raised their phones, recording, some jeering. She stood there, briefcase clutched to her chest, trembling. Then something shifted in her eyes, a flash of steel replacing fear. Her hand moved slowly, deliberately, reaching into her jacket. What emerged wasn't surrender. It was an FBI badge, catching sunlight like a weapon, and the world stopped breathing. The city hummed with its usual chaos that Tuesday afternoon, but for Amara Johnson, the world had narrowed to this single moment of confrontation. She was 32 years old, with skin the color of polished mahogany and natural hair that formed a crown of tight coils around her face. Her business attire was deliberately unremarkable, a simple gray blazer over dark slacks, chosen specifically to blend in, to not draw attention. That was the point of being undercover, after all. She'd been tracking a corruption case for 6 months, following paper trails that led from City Hall to the police department, and today she'd been heading to meet an informant when the patrol car had pulled alongside her. The lead officer, Brennan, was a thick-necked man with 20 years on the force and a reputation that preceded him in the worst ways. His partner, Rodriguez, younger and eager to prove himself, had been the one to call out first. "Hey you. Yeah, you with the briefcase. What are you doing in this neighborhood?" The question itself was loaded. This was downtown, public space, where anyone had the right to walk. But Amara knew better than to argue. She'd learned long ago that being right didn't always mean being safe. "I'm just heading to a meeting," she'd replied, keeping her voice steady, neutral, non-threatening. It was a practiced tone, one she'd perfected over years of navigating spaces where her presence was questioned before her credentials were known. The weight of her concealed badge pressed against her ribs, a constant reminder of who she really was beneath this carefully constructed facade. "Meeting?" Officer Chen, the third one, had stepped closer, his hand resting casually on his service weapon. "What kind of meeting? You dealing? That what's in the briefcase?" His eyes narrowed with suspicion that seemed more theatrical than genuine, the kind of performance cops put on when they wanted to justify what came next. The fourth officer, Wilson, had already moved behind her, a tactical position she recognized even as she kept her expression calm. They were boxing her in, a technique used to intimidate, to establish dominance. The crowd was growing now, office workers on their lunch breaks, teenagers with nothing better to do, all of them sensing that something was about to happen. The air crackled with anticipation, that peculiar energy that preceded violence. "I'm not dealing anything," Amara said carefully. "I work in consulting. The briefcase has documents, nothing more." She could have ended it there, could have flashed her badge and watched them scatter like roaches when the lights come on. But 6 months of careful undercover work held her back. She was so close to exposing the corruption that ran from these very streets all the way to City Hall. "Consulting," Brennan repeated, his tone mocking. "Right, and I'm the mayor. See, here's the thing, we've had reports of suspicious activity in this area. Someone matching your description." He took a step closer, close enough that she could smell the stale coffee on his breath, see the burst capillaries in his nose that spoke of too many nights with a bottle. It was a lie, and everyone knew it. But that was the game, wasn't it? The description was always vague enough to fit anyone they wanted it to fit. Black woman, medium height, professional appearance. It could describe 1,000 women in this city. But right now, it described her, and that was all that mattered to them. The Constitution, probable cause, reasonable suspicion, those were just words on paper when you were standing on a street corner, surrounded by men with guns and badges. The crowd had formed a semicircle now, phones out, already streaming to social media. Amara could hear the comments being narrated in real time. "Yo, they're about to arrest this lady for nothing. She ain't even do anything," mixed with less sympathetic voices. "She probably did something. They don't just stop people for no reason." The divide in the crowd mirrored the divide in the country, a chasm that seemed to grow wider with each passing day. Her hands began to shake, not from fear but from exhaustion. 6 months undercover, 6 months of being nobody, of swallowing her authority, of playing small to get close to the truth. She was tired, bone-deep tired, of always having to prove she belonged, always having to earn space that others inhabited freely. The FBI badge in her inner pocket felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds. She could end this right now, could reveal who she was, but that would blow her cover, destroy months of careful work. The corruption she was investigating reached deep into this very precinct. These officers might even be part of it. "I'm going to need you to open the briefcase," Brennan said, stepping closer. His breath smelled of coffee and cigarettes, and something else, the sour smell of a man who enjoyed his power a little too much. "And keep your hands where I can see them while you do it." "I know my rights," Amara replied, lifting her chin slightly. "You need probable cause." The slap came without warning. Brennan's open palm connected with her cheek with enough force to make her stumble. The briefcase fell from her hands, papers scattering across the sidewalk like white birds taking flight. The crowd gasped, then erupted. Some cheered, actually cheered, while others shouted in protest. But nobody intervened. They just kept filming, bearing witness to a scene that had played out on American streets for centuries, just with different technology to capture it. Rodriguez laughed, a sharp bark of amusement that cut through the chaos. "She wants to talk about rights," he said to his partners. "Isn't that cute? They always want to talk about rights." Chen was already bending down, gathering the scattered papers with theatrical suspicion, holding each one up to the light as if looking for hidden contraband. Wilson maintained his position behind her, ready to grab her if she tried to run, his hand hovering near his taser. The side of Amara's face throbbed, already beginning to swell. She could taste copper in her mouth where her teeth had cut the inside of her cheek. This was at the moment where she had to choose between her cover and her dignity, between the case and her safety. But as she stood there, surrounded by laughing officers and a crowd that watched her humiliation like it was entertainment, she realized there was no choice at all. Some lines, once crossed, demanded a response. Her hand moved slowly to her jacket, and immediately all four officers tensed. "Keep your hands where we can see them." Wilson barked from behind her, his hand moving to his weapon. The crowd held its collective breath, phones steady, recording what they thought might be the next viral video of police brutality. Or worse. But Amara's movements were deliberate, calculated. She reached past the pocket where her phone sat, past the pen she always carried, to the leather holder that contained her identity, her authority, her truth. The badge came out smooth and fast, held high above her head where everyone could see it. The golden eagle caught the afternoon sun, the letters FBI gleaming like a revelation, like justice itself made manifest. "Special Agent Amara Johnson, FBI," she said, her voice carrying across the street with an authority that made even the traffic seem to pause. "And you just assaulted a federal agent." The transformation was instantaneous. Brennan's face went from red to white so fast it looked like someone had drained the blood from his body. Rodriguez's laughter died in his throat, replaced by a strangled sound that might have been fear. Chen dropped the papers he'd been examining, and they scattered again, forgotten. Wilson took a step back, then another, his hand falling away from his weapon as if it had suddenly become radioactive. The crowd's reaction was equally dramatic. Where there had been division, now there was unified shock. The phones kept recording, but the commentary had changed. "Oh shit, she's FBI. They're fucked now. Did you see him hit her? That's on camera." The same people who had been laughing moments before were now documenting evidence, their cameras becoming weapons of accountability. Amara kept the badge high, letting everyone get a good look, letting the cameras capture every detail. She knew how this worked in a few hours. The video would be everywhere, and there would be no denying what had happened here. No way to spin it, no way to make it disappear. The truth, as her father had always said, had a way of coming out eventually. The story of Amara's childhood began in the riverside housing projects of Baltimore, where hope was a luxury most couldn't afford, and dreams were something you kept hidden, protected from the harsh reality of the streets. She was 7 years old when her world shattered, the night the police came for her father. Marcus Johnson was a good man, worked double shifts at the steel plant, never missed church on Sunday, never raised his hand to his wife or children. But none of that mattered when 3 witnesses pointed him out in a lineup for an armed robbery he couldn't have committed. Amara remembered every detail of that night with the painful clarity that trauma brings. The door exploding inward, wood splintering under the battering ram. Her mother's screams, high and terrified. Her little brother Marcus Jr. scrambling under the bed, his Spider-Man pajamas disappearing into the darkness. And her father, standing in the living room in his undershirt and boxers, hands raised, saying over and over, "There's been a mistake. I was at work. Check with my supervisor." There's been a mistake. But mistakes, Amara learned that night, were something that happened to other people. For people like them, there were only circumstances and consequences. The circumstances were that 3 people had identified a tall black man running from the scene of a robbery. The consequences were that Marcus Johnson, 6'1" and black, was close enough to fit the description, and that was all that mattered. The trial was a foregone conclusion. The public defender, overwhelmed with dozens of cases, had 15 minutes to review the file before court. The witnesses were convincing, even though they'd only seen the perpetrator for seconds in the dark. Marcus's alibi that he'd been working a double shift at the plant was dismissed as easily fabricated, even though his supervisor testified on his behalf. The jury, 11 white faces and 1 Latino, deliberated for less than 2 hours, guilty. 15 years. Amara visited him every week in the beginning, sitting across from him in the visiting room of Maryland Correctional Institution. The glass between them was thick enough to stop a bullet, but not thick enough to hide the way her father aged, week by week, month by month. His shoulders, once broad and strong from years of manual labor, began to stoop. His hair, which her mother used to trim every Sunday after church, grew wild and gray at the temples. "Baby girl," he would say, pressing his hand against the glass while she pressed hers on the other side, their palms separated by an inch that might as well have been a universe. "Don't you let this make you bitter. You study hard, you keep your head up, and you remember the truth always comes out eventually. Maybe not today, maybe not tomorrow, but eventually." She wanted to believe him, but belief was hard to maintain when she watched her mother work 3 jobs to keep them afloat. When the kids at school whispered about her jailbird father, when teachers looked at her with that particular mixture of pity and lowered expectations that followed the children of the incarcerated like a shadow, Marcus Jr. handled it by fighting, coming home with bloody knuckles and suspension notices until he dropped out at 16. Their mother handled it by not handling it at all, developing a relationship with prescription pills that would eventually take her to a place beyond visiting hours. But Amara handled it by burning with a cold, focused rage that she transformed into academic excellence. Every A on her report card was a small revenge against the system that had taken her father. Every academic award was proof that they were wrong about her family, about what she could become. She graduated valedictorian of her high school, full scholarship to University of Maryland, where she studied criminal justice with the single-minded determination of someone who had a score to settle with the world. The truth did come out eventually, just as her father had promised. 8 years after his conviction, a man named Raymond Torres was arrested for a series of armed robberies. Under interrogation, he confessed to several others, including the one Marcus had been convicted for. The witnesses, when pressed, admitted they'd been shown Marcus's photo repeatedly before the lineup, coached by detectives eager to clear a case. The actual surveillance footage from the plant, which had mysteriously disappeared during the original trial, was suddenly found in an evidence locker. Marcus was released on a Tuesday afternoon in April. Amara, now 15, stood outside the prison gates with what was left of their family, just her and her mother, as Marcus Jr. was serving his own sentence by then for drug possession. Her father walked out in the same clothes he'd been arrested in, now hanging loose on his diminished frame. He hugged them both, and Amara could feel how thin he'd become, how much the system had taken from him beyond just years. The state gave him $50,000 in compensation for 8 years of wrongful incarceration. It worked out to about $17 a day for each day of freedom they'd stolen from him. He took the money without complaint, used it to buy a small apartment, and went back to work at the plant like nothing had happened. But Amara knew better. She saw how he flinched when police sirens wailed past, how he kept his receipts for everything, creating an alibi for every moment of his day, how he never drove at night anymore, never went anywhere alone if he could help it. "I'm going to be FBI," she told him one evening over dinner. The acceptance letter from Quantico spread between them on the kitchen table. Her father had looked at her for a long moment, his eyes carrying the weight of everything he'd seen, everything he'd lost. "That's a hard path, baby girl," he said finally. "Being on the inside of the system that broke us. You sure that's what you want?" "Someone has to change it from within," she replied. "Someone has to be there to stop what happened to you from happening to others." He nodded slowly, reached across the table to take her hand. "Then you be the best damn agent they've ever seen. You be so good they can't ignore you, can't sideline you, can't make you into a token. You be the truth that comes out eventually." Quantico had been its own kind of trial. 22 weeks of physical and mental challenges, of proving herself over and over again to instructors and fellow trainees who often looked at her like she was filling a quota rather than earning her place. There were 3 other black women in her class of 50. By graduation, she was the only one left. Not because the others weren't capable, but because the weight of being exceptional every single day, of representing an entire race with every action, had broken them in ways the physical training never could. Her first years in the Bureau were spent in the Baltimore field office, investigating gang violence and drug trafficking. Important work, but she noticed how she was always assigned to cases in black neighborhoods, always brought in when they needed someone who could relate to the community. She was an agent when it was convenient, a black woman when it was useful, and somehow never just Agent Johnson. The turning point came 5 years into her career when she was assigned to a joint task force investigating police corruption in several major cities. It was supposed to be a career-making case, the kind that led to promotions and commendations. What she found instead was a web of resistance, of blue walls and closed ranks, of evidence that disappeared, and witnesses who suddenly forgot what they'd seen. The investigation was quietly shut down after 6 months, the findings buried in bureaucratic language that said everything and nothing at once. That's when Amara learned that changing the system from within was like trying to renovate a house while living in it. Every board you pried up revealed more rot underneath, and the people living upstairs didn't want you making noise. But she persisted, taking on cases others didn't want, building a reputation as someone who got results even when the odds were stacked against her. Which led her here, to this moment, standing on a street corner with a swelling cheek and 4 terrified police officers who had just realized they'd kicked a hornet's nest they didn't even know existed. The moment after Amara revealed her FBI badge stretched like a taut wire, ready to snap. The 4 officers stood frozen, their earlier bravado evaporating like morning mist under an unforgiving sun. Brennan's hand trembled as he reached for his radio, his voice cracking as he called dispatch. "This is Unit 2-3. We need a supervisor at 5th and Madison. Immediately." The pause that followed was heavy with unspoken questions. "It's complicated. Just send someone. Now." The crowd had grown to nearly 100 people, forming a tight circle around the scene. Their phones remained raised, capturing every second, every micro-expression that crossed the officers' faces. Someone had started a Facebook Live that already had 3,000 viewers and climbing. The comments scrolled past in a blur. "They done messed up now." FBI sister said, "Not today. This is about to be national news." Amara stood perfectly still, her badge still raised, letting the weight of the moment settle fully on the officer's shoulders. Her cheek throbbed with each heartbeat, already swelling, the copper taste of blood still sharp in her mouth. But she didn't touch her face, didn't show any sign of pain. She'd learned long ago that in moments like these, stillness was its own kind of power. "Agent Johnson," Rodriguez started, his voice pitched high with panic. "We didn't know. How could we know? You weren't in uniform. You didn't identify yourself." "I wasn't required to," Amara cut him off, her voice steady as granite. "I was walking down a public street. You had no probable cause to stop me, no reasonable suspicion to detain me, and absolutely no justification to assault me." She finally lowered her badge, clipping it to her belt where it remained visible. "But you did it anyway. Why?" The question hung in the air like an accusation. Chen and Wilson exchanged glances, both taking small steps backward, as if distance might somehow minimize their involvement. But the cameras caught everything: their faces, their badge numbers, their complicity in what had just occurred. "This is all a misunderstanding," Brennan tried again, sweat now visibly beading on his forehead despite the cool afternoon air. "We've had reports of suspicious activity. We were just doing our job." "Your job?" Amara's voice remained level, but there was steel underneath. "Tell me, Officer Brennan, what exactly about me was suspicious? Was it my briefcase, my business attire? Or was it something else, something you noticed before you even spoke to me?" A woman in the crowd shouted, "Say it louder for the people in back." Others joined in, their voices creating a chorus of support that seemed to make the officers shrink even further. The power dynamic had completely reversed. Where minutes before they had been the authority, now they were exposed, vulnerable, their every move being documented and judged. Sirens approached, multiple vehicles by the sound of it. Within moments, 3 police cars and 2 unmarked SUVs pulled up, their arrival adding to the chaos. A man in a captain's uniform emerged from one of the cars, his face already tight with concern. Captain Michael Torres, whom Amara recognized from her investigation files. He was supposedly one of the clean ones, but in her experience, clean in a dirty system just meant better at hiding the dirt. What the hell is going on here? Torres demanded, taking in the scene, the crowd, the phones, his 4 officers looking like they'd seen a ghost, and Amara standing in the center of it all, with her FBI badge gleaming on her belt. Captain Torres, Amara said, her voice carrying clearly. Your officers racially profiled me, detained me without cause, and Officer Brennan physically assaulted me. All of this was captured on multiple cameras. I've already contacted my superiors at the FBI. A response team is en route. Torres's face went through several expressions in rapid succession: confusion, understanding, fear, and finally, a calculated attempt at damage control. Agent Johnson, I'm sure we can resolve this situation professionally. Perhaps we could speak privately. Number.ag. The word was simple, final. There's nothing private about what happened here. Your officers didn't assault me privately. They did it right here, in public, in broad daylight, in front of all these witnesses. She gestured to the crowd, which had grown even larger with the arrival of more police. So we'll handle this publicly too. More sirens, different ones this time. 2 black SUVs with federal plates pulled up, and agents in dark suits emerged, their FBI badges visible on their belts. The lead agent, a tall black woman named Patricia Hayes, whom Amara had worked with before, surveyed the scene with sharp eyes before approaching. Agent Johnson, Hayes said formally, loud enough for everyone to hear. Are you injured? Do you need medical attention? I was struck in the face by Officer Brennan, Amara replied, equally formal. I'm requesting a full medical examination to document my injuries. I'm also requesting that all 4 officers be detained pending a federal investigation for assault on a federal agent, violation of civil rights, and abuse of power. The crowd erupted in cheers and applause. Someone started chanting justice, and others joined in. The officers looked between their captain and the FBI agents, realizing that their thin blue line offered no protection here. Federal superseded local, and they all knew it. Now wait a minute, Torres tried to interject. These are my officers. Any investigation should go through proper channels. The proper channels start with us, Hayes said coolly. Your officers assaulted a federal agent. That makes this our jurisdiction. She turned to the 4 officers. You're not under arrest at this moment, but you are persons of interest in a federal investigation. You'll need to come with us for questioning. Brennan's face had gone from white to red again, but this time with indignation rather than anger. This is ridiculous. We were doing our job. She didn't identify herself. I have a question for you, Officer Brennan, Amara interrupted, stepping closer to him. The crowd quieted, sensing something important was about to happen. If I had been a white woman in business attire carrying a briefcase, would you have stopped me? Would you have accused me of dealing drugs? Would you have slapped me when I mentioned my rights? The silence that followed was deafening. Brennan's mouth opened and closed, but no words came out. Because everyone knew the answer. Everyone had always known the answer. The only difference was that this time, the person he'd chosen to make an example of had the power to make him an example instead. A news van pulled up, then another. Reporters emerged with cameras and microphones, drawn by the social media storm that was already trending nationally. Number FBIW, while black was the top hashtag on Twitter. The video of the slap had been shared over 50,000 times in less than 20 minutes. Agent Johnson, a reporter called out. Can you tell us what happened here? Amara turned to face the cameras, her swollen cheek visible to the lenses, the mark of Brennan's hand still red against her skin. What happened here happens every day in this country. The only difference is that today, it happened to someone with a badge that carries federal authority. But I want to be clear, my badge shouldn't be what makes this wrong. It was wrong the moment these officers decided to stop me for no reason other than the color of my skin. The crowd roared its approval. The 4 officers were being escorted to the federal vehicles now, not in handcuffs, but clearly not free to leave either. Brennan looked back at Amara one last time, and she saw something in his eyes that might have been the beginning of understanding, or maybe just the recognition that his actions had finally caught up with him. As the federal vehicles pulled away with the officers inside, Captain Torres approached Amara. His voice was low, meant only for her. You have no idea what you've just started. This goes deeper than 4 patrol officers. There are people who won't appreciate you making waves like this. Amara met his gaze steadily. Captain, I know exactly what I've started, and those people you're talking about, they should be worried. Because this is just the beginning. Torres walked away without another word, but Amara could see the calculation in his movements. He was already thinking about damage control, about phone calls that needed to be made, about stories that needed to be coordinated. But it was too late for that. The truth was out there now, spreading across the internet faster than any cover-up could contain it. Agent Hayes approached with a medical kit. "Let me look at that cheek," she said, her tone softening from the formal one she'd used earlier. As she gently examined the swelling, she said quietly, "You know this is going to get complicated. They're going to come at you from every angle. The union, the department, maybe even some people in our own agency who think you should have handled this differently." "I know," Amara replied, wincing as Hayes touched a particularly tender spot. "But I'm tired of handling things differently. I'm tired of being expected to absorb abuse with grace, to turn the other cheek literally, in this case. Sometimes the only way to change the game is to flip the board." The crowd was beginning to disperse now, but slowly, reluctantly. Many came up to Amara to offer support, to share their own stories of encounters with those same officers. An elderly black woman grabbed her hand and squeezed it tight. "Thank you," she said, tears in her eyes. "My grandson was stopped by that same officer last month. Roughed him up pretty bad. But who was going to believe him over a cop? Maybe now someone will." As the afternoon sun began to sink lower in the sky, painting the street in shades of gold and amber, Amara stood there, accepting the thanks and stories of strangers who saw in her something they'd been waiting for: someone with power who understood powerlessness, someone who could fight back and win. But even as she stood there, even as she accepted their gratitude and documented their stories for the investigation that would follow, Amara knew this was just the first battle in what would be a long war. The system didn't change because of one incident, no matter how viral it went. The system fought back, adapted, found new ways to maintain the status quo. Her phone buzzed with a text from her supervisor at the FBI. "My office, tomorrow, 8 a.m. We need to discuss your handling of this situation." She wasn't surprised. She'd known from the moment she pulled out her badge that there would be consequences, not just for the officers who'd assaulted her, but for her as well. The Bureau liked its agents to be invisible, to work in the shadows, to avoid making waves. She'd just created a tsunami. But as she looked at her swollen face in her phone's camera, at the mark that Brennan's hand had left on her skin, she felt no regret. Some marks were meant to be visible. Some waves needed to be made. And sometimes the only way to reveal the rot in the system was to tear off the boards and let everyone see what was underneath. The next morning arrived with a storm of media coverage. Amara's face was on every news channel, her name trending on every social media platform. The video of the incident had been viewed over 10 million times. Op-eds were being written, protests were being organized, and the Baltimore Police Department was in full crisis mode. But Amara had to face her own crisis first. FBI headquarters in Baltimore was a gleaming modern building that always made Amara think of a fortress designed to keep threats out. But sometimes she wondered if it wasn't also meant to keep uncomfortable truths in. She arrived at 7:45 a.m., 15 minutes early as always, her face still bearing the purple-yellow bruise from Brennan's hand, despite the makeup she'd carefully applied. Special Agent in charge Robert Kingston was waiting in his office, a corner suite with views of the inner harbor that probably cost more per square foot than most Baltimore residents made in a year. He was a tall white man in his 50s, silver-haired, with the kind of austere presence that suggested he'd never made a mistake in his life, or at least never admitted to one. "Agent Johnson," he said without preamble as she entered. "Sit." She sat, keeping her posture straight, her hands folded in her lap. She'd been through enough of these meetings to know that showing weakness was blood in the water. "You've created quite a situation," Kingston continued, moving to stand by the window, his back to her. "In less than 24 hours, you've turned a simple street encounter into a national incident. The director himself called me last night. The Attorney General wants a briefing. The President's advisors are asking questions. I was assaulted by a police officer while conducting federal business," Amara replied evenly. "I responded according to protocol." Kingston turned to face her, his expression unreadable. "Protocol would have been to identify yourself immediately and avoid the confrontation altogether. Protocol would have been to report the incident through proper channels, not create a media circus. With all due respect, sir, I was undercover on an active investigation. Identifying myself immediately would have compromised 6 months of work. And as for the media circus, I didn't invite those cameras. The officers chose to assault me in public. Your investigation, Kingston said, returning to his desk and pulling out a file. The corruption case. You were supposed to be gathering intelligence, not becoming the story yourself. Sometimes the story finds you, Amara replied. And sometimes being the story is exactly what's needed to expose the truth. Kingston studied her for a long moment. You think you're clever, don't you? You think this was some kind of victory? I think 4 officers who abused their power are now facing federal charges, Amara said. I think thousands of people who've been victimized by those same officers now have hope that justice is possible. If that's not a victory, I don't know what is. What you've done, Kingston said slowly, is put a target on your back, not just with the Baltimore PD, but with law enforcement across the country. You've made yourself a symbol, Agent Johnson, and symbols have a way of becoming martyrs. The threat was subtle but clear. Amara felt a chill run down her spine but kept her expression neutral. Are you suggesting I should have allowed myself to be assaulted in silence? I'm suggesting that there are ways to handle these situations that don't involve becoming a hashtag, Kingston replied. Your investigation is now compromised. Your cover is blown. And frankly, your ability to work effectively in this city may be permanently damaged. Or enhanced, Amara countered. The community trusts me now in a way they never would have before. People who would never talk to the FBI are reaching out, wanting to share their stories, provide information. This could break open not just my case, but dozens of others. Kingston leaned back in his chair, fingers steepled. The Bureau doesn't operate on could. We operate on careful, methodical investigation. What you've done is the opposite of that. What I've done is refuse to be a victim, Amara said, her voice rising slightly for the first time. What I've done is what any agent should do when assaulted in the line of duty. The only difference is the race of the agent and the race of the attackers. And if that's a problem for the Bureau, then maybe the Bureau needs to examine its own priorities. The silence that followed was heavy, charged. Kingston's jaw tightened, and for a moment Amara thought he might actually lose his composure. But he simply stood, walked to the door, and opened it. You're suspended from field duty pending a full review of the incident, he said. You'll need to submit a detailed report of everything that happened, every decision you made. Internal Affairs will want to interview you. And Agent Johnson, I suggest you think very carefully about your future with the Bureau. Not everyone who makes waves survives the storm they create. Amara stood, straightened her jacket, and walked to the door. But before leaving, she turned back. Sir, with all due respect, I've been surviving storms my whole life. This one's no different. As she walked out of the building, her phone buzzed with messages. Lawyers offering to represent her pro bono, civil rights organizations wanting her to speak at events, publishers interested in her story, and buried among them, a text from an unknown number. Agent Johnson, I have information about the officers who assaulted you. They're part of something bigger. Meet me at Lexington Market, noon. Come alone. She looked back at the FBI building, at the fortress that was supposed to be her professional home, but increasingly felt like another system designed to maintain the status quo. Then she looked at the text again. She'd been suspended from field duty, but technically, she wasn't in the field if she was just going to lunch. Lexington Market was crowded, as always, a sensory overload of smells, sounds, and colors. Amara found the sender at a back table in one of the food stalls, a young black woman, maybe 25, nervously picking at a crab cake. You're the FBI agent, the woman said. It wasn't a question. I saw the video. Everyone saw the video. And you are? Keisha. Keisha Williams. I work dispatch for Baltimore PD. She looked around nervously. I shouldn't be here. If they knew I was talking to you. What do you know about those officers? Amara asked, sitting down across from her. Keisha pulled out a phone, showed her a series of text messages. There's a group of them. They call themselves the Hunters. They have quotas, not official ones, but their own. How many stops? How many arrests? Specifically targeting black neighborhoods. Brennan, Rodriguez, Chen, Wilson, they're all part of it. But it goes higher, much higher. Amara studied the messages, her investigator's mind already connecting dots. How high? Captain Torres knows. He might even be directing it. And there's money involved, civil asset forfeiture, but not all of it makes it to evidence. Some of it just disappears. This was it. This was the connection she'd been looking for in her corruption investigation. The assault yesterday hadn't been random bad luck, she'd been getting too close, and whether they knew she was FBI or not, they'd decided to send a message. "Will you testify to this?" Amara asked. Keisha shook her head. "I have a daughter. I need this job. But there are others who might, now that they've seen someone stand up to them. Your video, what you did, it's given people hope." After Keisha left, Amara sat in the market, surrounded by the everyday chaos of Baltimore life, and thought about what came next. She was suspended, but she had leads. She was targeted, but she was also protected by the very visibility that made her a target. It was a delicate balance, but she'd walked tightrope before. Her phone rang. Her father. "Baby girl," his voice was warm but worried. "I saw the news. Are you okay?" "I'm okay, Dad. It's complicated, but I'm okay." There was a pause then. "I'm proud of you. What you did, standing up like that, your mother would have been proud too." Amara felt tears prick her eyes for the first time since the incident. "Dad, they're trying to push me out. The Bureau, they think I've become too visible, too controversial." "Let me ask you something," her father said. "Are you fighting for the Bureau, or are you fighting for justice? Because those aren't always the same thing." After the call, Amara made a decision. She pulled out her phone and opened Twitter. She'd never been active on social media. The Bureau discouraged it, but maybe it was time to change that too. "My name is Special Agent Amara Johnson," she typed. "Yesterday, I was assaulted by 4 Baltimore police officers for the crime of walking while black. This is my story, but it's also the story of thousands who don't have a badge to protect them. It's time for change, real change, and I won't be silent anymore." She hit send. Within an hour, the tweet had 50,000 retweets. Within 2 hours, she had interview requests from every major news network. Within 3 hours, Kingston was calling, furious, but she didn't answer. She was done asking permission to tell the truth. The next few days blurred together in a whirlwind of media appearances, legal consultations, and strategic planning. Amara hired a civil rights attorney, Melissa Chang, a fierce advocate who'd made her reputation taking on police brutality cases. Together, they decided to file both criminal charges and a civil lawsuit, not just against the 4 officers, but against the Baltimore Police Department itself. The police union predictably closed ranks. They held a press conference where they painted Amara as an aggressive federal agent who'd entrapped 4 good officers just trying to do their job. They released Brennan's personnel file, highlighting commendations and positive reviews, while conveniently omitting the numerous civilian complaints that had been filed against him over the years. But for every attack from the union, there was a wave of support from the community. Other victims of the hunters came forward, sharing their stories. A pattern emerged: dozens of illegal stops, planted evidence, excessive force, all targeting black residents in specific neighborhoods. What had started as Amara's personal incident was becoming a reckoning for the entire department. The preliminary hearing was set for 2 weeks after the incident. The courthouse was surrounded by protesters, some supporting the officers, but most supporting Amara. The media was there in force, treating it like a preview of what could be one of the most significant police brutality cases in recent history. Inside the courtroom, Amara sat with her attorney, trying to ignore the hostile stares from the officers' supporters who packed the gallery. Brennan, Rodriguez, Chen, and Wilson sat at the defense table, dressed in suits instead of uniforms, trying to look respectable. But Amara could see the anger in Brennan's eyes, the fear in Rodriguez's fidgeting, the calculation in Chen's expression, and the resignation in Wilson's slumped shoulders. The judge, an elderly black woman named Honor, Abel Judith Washington, commanded respect the moment she entered. She'd been on the bench for 20 years and had a reputation for fairness that transcended political lines. "This is a preliminary hearing to determine if there is sufficient evidence to proceed with federal charges against the defendants," Judge Washington began. "This is not a trial, and I will not tolerate any grandstanding or disruption. Is that understood?" The federal prosecutor, a young Latino man named David Ramirez, stood. "Your Honor, the government will show clear evidence that the defendants violated federal law when they assaulted Special Agent Johnson. We have video evidence, multiple witnesses, and a clear pattern of civil rights violations." The defense attorney, A slick-looking man named Richard Hartley, who was known for defending cops, stood next. Your Honor, we'll demonstrate that this was a routine stop that escalated only because Agent Johnson failed to identify herself and actively resisted lawful orders. Let's see the evidence, Judge Washington said simply. The video played on the courtroom screens. The entire incident, from multiple angles. The initial stop, the escalating harassment, the slap, Amara's revelation of her FBI credentials. The courtroom was silent, except for the audio from the videos, the officer's laughter, the crack of the slap, the gasps from the crowd. When it finished, Ramirez called his first witness. Amara took the stand, the bruise on her face still visible beneath her makeup. Agent Johnson, Ramirez began, can you tell us what happened on the afternoon in question? Amara recounted the events clearly, professionally, without emotion. She explained her undercover work, the reason she didn't immediately identify herself, the lack of probable cause for the stop. Did you at any point resist arrest or obstruct justice? Ramirez asked. I was never told I was under arrest until after Officer Brennan assaulted me, Amara replied. And asking about probable cause is not obstruction, it's a constitutional right. Hartley's cross-examination was aggressive. Agent Johnson, isn't it true that you deliberately provoked these officers to create an incident? Isn't it true that you could have prevented all of this by simply showing your badge? I could have prevented it by being white, Amara said quietly. Because we all know a white woman in business attire wouldn't have been stopped in the first place. Objection, Hartley shouted. Overruled, Judge Washington said. The witness is speaking to her perception of the events. Continue. Agent Johnson, you've become quite famous from this incident, haven't you? Media appearances, book deals, speaking engagements. I've received offers, Amara admitted, but I haven't accepted any of them. This isn't about fame or money. It's about justice. Justice or revenge? Hartley pressed. You were suspended by the FBI, weren't you? Perhaps this is all about salvaging your career? Melissa Chang stood. Objection, Your Honor. Counsel is badgering the witness and making accusations without foundation. Sustained. Mr. Hartley, stick to the facts of the case. The defense then called Officer Wilson to the stand. Of the four, he seemed the most remorseful, or at least the most aware of how bad this looked. Officer Wilson, Hartley began, tell us what happened from your perspective. Wilson glanced nervously at his fellow defendants. We were on patrol. Officer Brennan spotted the defendant. Agent Johnson, and said she looked suspicious. We initiated a stop. What made her look suspicious? Wilson hesitated. She was carrying a briefcase and walking quickly. Is that all? Another hesitation. Officer Brennan said she fit the description of someone we were looking for. What description was that? Wilson looked miserable. Black female, professional dress. Even Hartley seemed to realize how bad that sounded. He quickly moved on. Did Agent Johnson comply with your orders? She asked questions. About probable cause. And then? Officer Brennan decided to search her briefcase. She protested. He struck her. The admission hung in the air. Brennan's face turned red with anger at his colleague's honesty. In your opinion, was the force justified? Hartley asked, clearly hoping for support. Wilson was quiet for a long moment. Then, no, it wasn't. The gallery erupted. Judge Washington banged her gavel. Order. The hearing continued for 2 more days. More witnesses, more evidence. The other victims Keisha had mentioned began coming forward, telling their stories. A pattern emerged that was impossible to ignore. The 4 officers had been systematically targeting black residents, using minor or invented infractions as pretexts for searches and arrests. On the final day, Judge Washington delivered her ruling. After reviewing all the evidence presented, this court finds sufficient cause to proceed with federal charges against all 4 defendants. The charges include assault on a federal officer, deprivation of civil rights under color of law, and conspiracy to violate civil rights. She looked directly at the defendants. I want to be clear about something. This case is not just about one incident. It's about a pattern of behavior that violates the very oath you took as police officers. You are supposed to protect and serve all citizens, not hunt them. This case will proceed to trial. As they left the courthouse, Amara was surrounded by reporters and supporters. But she noticed a familiar face in the crowd, her father, standing near the back, tears in his eyes. She pushed through the crowd to reach him. "You did it, baby girl," he said, pulling her into a hug. "You stood up to them and won." "It's not over yet," she reminded him. "This was just the beginning." "I know," he said, "but you've already won something important. You've shown them that we won't be silent anymore, that we can't be slapped down without consequences." That night, Amara received a call from Director Kingston. "The suspension is lifted," he said without preamble. "The director himself overruled me. Apparently, you've become too valuable as a symbol of the Bureau's commitment to justice to sideline. You're being transferred to the Civil Rights Division. Congratulations, Agent Johnson. You've got what you wanted." But as Amara hung up, she wondered if what she'd wanted and what she'd gotten were the same thing. She was a symbol now, but symbols were often more useful as ideas than as people. She would have to navigate carefully, balancing her role as an agent with her newfound position as an icon of resistance. The actual trial began 3 months later, after extensive pretrial motions and media coverage that had made it one of the most watched cases in the country. The courthouse was a circus, protesters on both sides, media trucks lining the streets, and security tighter than anyone could remember. The prosecution, led by Ramirez with Amara's testimony as the centerpiece, laid out a devastating case. The video evidence was undeniable. The pattern of behavior was clear. Expert witnesses testified about the psychological impact of police brutality, the systemic nature of racial profiling, and the violation of constitutional rights. The defense tried every strategy they could think of. They tried to paint Amara as an ambitious agent looking for publicity. They brought in character witnesses for the officers. They argued that the slap was a split-second decision made under stress, not a federal crime. But the most dramatic moment came when Officer Chen took the stand in his own defense. Under cross-examination by Ramirez, he was asked about the hunters group that Keisha had mentioned. "I don't know what you're talking about," Chen said. Ramirez produced the text messages Keisha had provided, now part of the official evidence. "These messages show you discussing quotas for arrests in black neighborhoods. Can you explain?" Chen looked panicked. He glanced at his co-defendants, then at his lawyer. "I plead the fifth." The admission by silence was damning. If there was nothing wrong with the messages, why refuse to discuss them? Brennan took the stand next, and his testimony was a disaster. His anger, barely controlled, leaked through as he insisted he'd done nothing wrong, that Amara had been uppity and needed to be put in her place. His lawyer visibly winced at the language. "So you hit her because she was uppity?" Ramirez pressed. "I was maintaining control of the situation," Brennan insisted. "By slapping a federal agent? I didn't know she was a federal agent. Would it have been acceptable if she wasn't?" Brennan had no good answer for that. The jury deliberated for 2 days. 2 days during which the nation held its breath, during which protests continued outside the courthouse, during which Amara barely slept, wondering if justice would actually be served or if the system would protect its own once again. When the verdict came, Amara was in the courtroom, sitting in the gallery with her father on one side and Agent Hayes on the other. The forewoman stood, a middle-aged white woman who looked like she'd rather be anywhere else. On the charge of assault on a federal officer, we find the defendant, Thomas Brennan, guilty. The courtroom erupted. Judge Washington banged her gavel repeatedly, threatening to clear the room. On the charge of deprivation of civil rights under color of law, we find the defendant, Thomas Brennan, guilty. One by one, the verdicts came down. Guilty, guilty, guilty. All 4 officers, convicted on all major counts. Wilson got the lightest sentence recommendation due to his cooperation, but all 4 were facing federal prison time. As the courtroom cleared, Amara stood in the hallway, surrounded by cameras and reporters, all wanting her reaction. She thought about all the victims who'd never gotten this moment, all the people who'd been slapped down literally and figuratively without recourse. "This verdict isn't just for me," she said, looking directly into the cameras. "It's for everyone who's ever been stopped for walking while black, driving while black, existing while black. It's proof that sometimes, not always, but sometimes, the system can work. But we need to keep pushing, keep demanding better, because this shouldn't be the exception. It should be the rule." The sentencing came a month later. Brennan got 5 years in federal prison. Rodriguez and Chen got 3 years each. Wilson got 18 months and probation. It wasn't enough, it never was, but it was something. It was accountability. The Baltimore Police Department underwent a federal review. Captain Torres was investigated and eventually resigned under pressure. The Hunters Group was disbanded, its members either fired or reassigned. New policies were implemented, requiring body cameras and stricter oversight of stops and searches. Amara returned to her work with the FBI, now in the Civil Rights Division, where she investigated police brutality cases across the country. She'd become a lightning rod beloved by some, hated by others, but impossible to ignore. 6 months after the trial, she was invited to speak at a conference on police reform. As she stood at the podium, looking out at an audience of law enforcement officials, community activists, and politicians, she thought about how far she'd come from that moment on the street when Brennan's hand had connected with her face. "Change is hard," she began. "It's uncomfortable. It requires us to look at ugly truths about ourselves and our institutions. But change is also necessary. What happened to me happens every day to people without badges, without recourse, without voices that will be heard. I'm here to be one of those voices, but I can't be the only one." She looked out at the audience, seeing skepticism on some faces, hope on others. "The badge I carry gives me authority, but it shouldn't take a badge to be treated with basic human dignity. It shouldn't take federal credentials to have your rights respected. Every person walking down the street, regardless of their race, their appearance, their neighborhood, deserves the same protection under the law." That's not a radical idea. That's the promise of America, and it's time we kept that promise. The applause was scattered at first, then grew. Not everyone was clapping. She could see the resistance in some faces, the resentment in others. But enough were applauding to give her hope. After her speech, a young black girl, maybe 12 years old, approached her with her mother. The girl was shy, hiding partially behind her mother's leg. "Go ahead, baby," the mother encouraged. "Are you really an FBI agent?" the girl asked. Amara knelt down to the girl's level, showing her the badge. "I really am. My teacher said black people can't be FBI agents. She said we're not smart enough." Amara felt her heart break, and her resolve strengthened simultaneously. "Your teacher is wrong. You can be anything you want to be. FBI agent, doctor, president, anything. Don't let anyone tell you different." The girl smiled, then suddenly hugged Amara. "I want to be like you when I grow up." As the girl and her mother walked away, Amara stood there, feeling the weight of being a symbol, a role model, a possibility made flesh. It was a heavy burden, but one she was willing to carry. A year after the incident, Amara received a call from an unexpected source, Officer Wilson. He was out of prison, on probation, working at a community center as part of his sentence. "Agent Johnson," he said, his voice uncertain. "I know I have no right to call you, but I wanted to apologize. Not the court-ordered apology, but a real one. What we did was wrong. What I participated in was wrong, and I'm sorry." Amara was quiet for a moment, processing. "Why are you really calling, Wilson?" "Because I have a daughter," he said. "She's 8. And I realized that if someone had done to her what we did to you, I'd want them in prison. I'd want justice. And I finally understood that wearing a badge doesn't make us above the law. It makes us more responsible to uphold it." "What do you want from me?" Amara asked. "Nothing," Wilson replied. "I just wanted you to know that at least one of us learned something from this. That your standing up to us mattered. It changed me." After the call, Amara sat in her office, looking out at the Baltimore skyline. The city hadn't changed overnight. The problems that led to her assault were still there: systemic racism, abuse of power, the blue wall of silence. But there were cracks in that wall now, places where light could get through. Her phone rang. Another case, another incident of police brutality, another family seeking justice. She answered it, ready to fight again, to stand up again, to be the voice for those who couldn't speak. Because that's what she'd learned from that slap on the street sometimes. The moment that breaks you is also the moment that makes you. Sometimes, the worst thing that happens to you becomes the thing that gives your life purpose. And sometimes, getting knocked down is just the beginning of standing taller than ever before. 5 years passed. Amara had become a household name, her work with the Civil Rights Division leading to numerous convictions and reforms. She'd written a book about her experience, with all proceeds going to a fund for victims of police brutality. She'd testified before Congress about the need for national police reform standards. She'd become everything Kingston had warned her about: a symbol, a target, a voice that couldn't be silenced. But on this particular evening, she wasn't Special Agent Johnson, civil rights icon. She was just Amara, walking down 5th and Madison, the same corner where everything had changed. The street looked different now. New businesses had opened. A community garden had been planted where an abandoned lot once stood, but the memories remained. She stood at the exact spot where Brennan had slapped her. The physical mark had long since healed, but she could still feel it sometimes, a phantom pain that reminded her of how far she'd come. A few people recognized her, nodding respectfully, some stopping to thank her, but most just went about their day. She wasn't a spectacle anymore, just a part of the city's story, woven into its complicated history. "Excuse me, Agent Johnson?" She turned to see a young man in a police uniform. For a moment, her body tensed, old instincts kicking in. But then she saw his face, young, nervous, hopeful. "I'm Officer Marcus Williams," he said. "I joined the force because of you, because I saw what you did, how you stood up for what was right, and I thought maybe I could help change things from the inside." Amara studied him. "It's not easy, changing things from the inside." "I know," he said, "but someone has to try, right? Someone has to be the cop who doesn't profile, who doesn't abuse power, who remembers that the badge is supposed to mean protection, not persecution. And you think you can be that cop?" "I'm trying," he said simply. "Every day I'm trying, and when it gets hard, when I see things that make me want to quit, I remember that video. I remember you standing there, holding up your badge, refusing to be intimidated, and I think if you could do that, I can do this." After he left, Amara continued her walk, thinking about ripples and waves, about how one moment can spread outward in ways you never expect. She thought about all the Officer Williams out there, the young people who'd seen her stand and decided to stand too, in their own ways, in their own fights. Her phone buzzed. Another case, another call for help. But also, a text from her father. "Proud of you, baby girl. Your mother would be too." She smiled, pocketed the phone, and kept walking. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, and for a moment, the city looked almost beautiful, almost like the place it could be rather than the place it was. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new fights, new opportunities to push for justice. But tonight, she was just a woman walking down a street where she'd once been slapped down and had chosen to rise up. A street where she'd learned that sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is refuse to accept the unacceptable, refuse to be silent, refuse to let them win. As she walked, she passed a group of young black girls, laughing and talking, moving through the world with a confidence she hadn't seen in her own youth. One of them recognized her, whispered to her friends, and they all looked back, eyes wide with something that might have been hope or recognition, or just the simple acknowledgement that she was proof of what was possible. Amara nodded to them, a silent message. Keep walking, keep standing, keep pushing, keep being. Because in the end, that's what it was all about. Not the badge, not the authority, not even the justice, though all of those mattered. It was about the right to exist, to walk down a street, to be in your skin without apology or fear. It was about the radical act of being yourself in a world that constantly told you to be less, to be quiet, to be invisible. She'd refused to be invisible that day 5 years ago, and every day since, she'd continued to refuse. That was her victory, her revolution, her resistance, the simple, powerful act of being. Special Agent Amara Johnson, FBI, walking while black, existing while powerful, and never, ever backing down. The city lights began to flicker on as dusk settled over Baltimore. Somewhere, a church bell rang. Somewhere, a siren wailed. Somewhere, another confrontation was happening. Another injustice was being perpetrated or prevented. The work was never done. The fight was never over. But as Amara Johnson walked through the city she'd helped change, even if just a little, she knew that the fight was worth it. Every slap endured, every stand taken, every voice raised, it all mattered. It all added up to something bigger than any one person, any one incident, any one victory. It added up to hope. And hope, she'd learned, was the most powerful badge of all.